The video game world is one that has constant change in it. Some stuff sticks around and some of it disappears. It's not always the good stuff that sticks around either. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks, 7 gaming trends that need to come back in 2023. I don't want to mess around. I'm just going to hit number 7 right off because this is the drum that I frankly love beating. It makes a great sound, and wow, it would be awesome if it got paid a little bit more attention by the industry. So number 7 is going to be feature complete games at launch. This is one of those that just has to be said. In the past few years, there has been a noticeable increase in the amount of unfinished games being released. And I don't mean early access games. I mean games that should be early access games, put into retail boxes and digital downloads in the various storefronts that don't have everything in them that they're intended to. And, let's not get started on the bugs. Sometimes they eventually get fixed too, but here's the thing that really blows my effing mind. Sometimes they don't. Like, they're just like, all right, well, we put out an incomplete game. Hope you like it. In a world where patches are possible. Like, are you not concerned if I will buy the next game? It's really nice when they do get fixed, but it's also kind of weird that releases are no longer about when the game comes out. They're also about the following months when it gets updated, when the performance improves, or when the devs finally manage to patch in some features that they promised but never did. Like, it's so much worse with the games that pretend to be finished too, but it's still annoying to have to sort through all these actual early access games. Like, I know I was complaining about the releases that are early access but aren't really, but early access isn't quarantined to Steam anymore. You can get an early access game just about anywhere, and it's annoying to deal with as a complication when you're reading about the game, figuring out, if I'm gonna buy this, I'm looking at a game, it sounds interesting, I'm thinking, wow, these features, these ideas sound real cool. Oh, it's in early access. Everything is, including the games that aren't in early access. Yes, early access works great for a lot of games out there. I'm not gonna say it doesn't, but there's a certain threshold that a game needs to be for it to be okay to release an early access version of it. And it varies upon the scope and idea of the project, sure. But as a player of games, I want to play a finished game, not something piecemeal that might look completely different when the game actually comes out, which could be years away, or in the case of Star Citizen, fricking never. Now, I'm not saying that early access is bad. For an indie developer trying to raise money to finish a game, it's often a way that works better than Kickstarter, in fact, and the good sales look good in terms of promoting the game. But like something like Disney's Dreamlight Valley, that shouldn't have come out in early access. That's too far. Like, do you think the Disney Corporation really needs to raise enough money to finish their game? No, they can afford it. So is it so much to ask to get a complete game at launch? And no, I'm not even complaining about day one patches. If they ship a game gold and continue working on it until the day of release, I know that we all used to complain a lot about that, but you know what? That's actually awesome. When a day one patch is the difference between a super buggy game and a complete game, and sometimes it is, that's actually fine, even if the publisher is trying to rush a game out. But man, a lot of games really come out in a rough state. Cyberpunk 2077, that's a full sentence. I don't need to say anything else. That is the subject, that is the predicate, the noun, the verb, that's the whole thing. The only upside is that somehow a lot of big developers are allowed to actually continue working on their games and fix it. That's the only upside to this. And it's an upside that if this wasn't a problem, wouldn't have to be an upside. And number 6 is curated marketplaces. So, marketplaces suck. They're hard to navigate, they're slow, they're overloaded with shovelware. It used to be a big deal when something like Life of the Black Tiger came out on PSN, but every day is Black Tiger Day on PSN the same way every day is Friday at Wendy's. Most of the crap we're talking about isn't even a game. A lot of it is scams, stuff that would have been laughed out of the Xbox Live indie game service for being awful. Most of them have barely any gameplay that can be finished in 5 to 10 minutes. Like, pretty much every free online arcade has games that are better than these. And it used to just be Steam with all of the shovelware. But now compared to eShop and PSN, the Steam store is like an oasis. It didn't used to be this way either. It used to be the console marketplaces that were super curated moderated and moderated. You'd see like a few releases a week, and it gave games the chance to stand out and be noticed. And now a lot of really good indie games get totally lost and ignored. Basically, the only way you'd be able to find the good ones is through word of mouth. Like Nintendo. They used to be especially ruthless about what would show up at the eShop, and just being on the platform was like a sign that there was a certain threshold met. And it is not like that now. And let me just quickly say, I don't think that mega tight moderation that ends up rejecting would-be masterpieces is good. And that's something that we saw a few years ago in a lot of these places. But the alternative there is to have bigger moderation teams that are able to check out more material, not just open the friggin' floodgates and let everyone in. Because frankly, we are in the era of the spam game. And number 5, and I think a lot of people are going to back me up on this one, the AA publisher. Like, I talk about this all the time with so many different people. This is one of my main theories of why we don't see as many good games now. There's basically only 2 types of games anymore: indie games and AAA games. And there's almost nothing in between. I mean, we see a few AA, but way back, there was a thriving AA industry with publishers that were not the big dog, but they were putting out major games like old school THQ, Acclaim, Atlas, Marvelous Incorporated. Not every single one of these games were great, but they had budgets behind them, and they were often more interesting and innovative than the stuff coming out of the AAA space. And the reason for that is your only options were not pixel art game made by one guy and most realistic, expensive project you've ever seen made by a couple thousand people. The market had a lot in between those things. Further, a lot of the AA publishers could just take risks that AAA publishers can't. And it's because they have budgets, but they don't have the biggest budgets. Instead of saying, hey, here's $500 million to make a game, they say, hey, here's $30 million. Give us the best you can out of $30 million. They're going to go, you know what? Let's do more than anybody has done with $30 million. And they end up making something that makes $500 million. And then they're not a AA, game studio anymore, but yeah. And that doesn't mean everything that came out of THQ or Acclaim was great. There's a reason why those companies don't exist, at least as they did back then. THQ is a completely different thing now. But the good sticks out in our memories a lot more than the bad, because these games with moderate budgets were often still very high quality. Thankfully, it does seem like the industry is kind of heeding this. Yeah, there are these big publishers like Ubisoft and EA that are clinging on to the few massive hits that keep them afloat. There are smaller publishers out there that are just consistently putting out really good games. I'm talking about companies like Annapurna, Devolver Digital, Focus Entertainment. Like, they've been quietly releasing some of the best games the last few years, and sometimes they're as good or even better than some of the AAA stuff. And number 4 is shorter games. Like, look at the major games from the last year, and there's going to be something that stands out. They're huge. God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, Elden Ring, Midnight Suns, Dying Light 2, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, them deciding that we can play Persona 5 on any platform we want now. But all these games take minimum 30 hours. And you know what? At this point, 30 hours almost feels like a shorter game. I know it's cliche for a game reviewer or commentator or whatever to complain games are too long because we're lazy, we want to finish the review faster, do our job quicker. But here's the thing. I love long games. In the 1990s, I played Final Fantasy games because it would take me forever to beat them, and I loved living in those worlds. But they were also among the very few games that took that long to beat. When every single game is that long, it's just exhausting. That's when you start to realize that the goal of the games is to be longer, because you start seeing a lot of games where the content doesn't match the length, and the game just ends up tedious. It's a common complaint with the recent Assassin's Creed games, and while I do like the style of those games, I think they could be shorter. Like, I was ready for Valhalla to end long before it ended. Doesn't mean I think Valhalla is bad. I actually think it's incredible. It just wears out its welcome. And everybody has an idea about how long a game should be. For a lot of people, 100 hours should be the baseline, maybe because they only play one game a year anyway, so they want their money's worth. For others, 12 hours is more than enough, and they're ready to move on to something else. What counts as long is different for everybody. We all have different schedules and different different tastes, but what really matters is the quality of the content. There's a lot of stuff that's in games that isn't there to be fun, or even interesting, or even really add anything other than time to the experience, and that just, wow, it could stop, and I'd be happy. I'm pretty excited about Assassin's Creed Mirage for this reason. It's apparently going to be a more focused experience that is more like the older Assassin's Creed games, so it's gonna be shorter. My hope is that it'll lead to a better game that people actually like and it's a huge hit, because if it does end up being a flop, we're probably only getting the big ones from now on. And that's not to say I don't want the big ones. I want both. Give me a Mirage and a Valhalla. Give the Valhallas the longer development cycles, and maybe release 2 or 3 of the Mirages in the meantime. I mean, there's plenty of exceptions, and there are short games coming out if you look for them, but they're not the biggest games of the year. So companies, take it down a notch. And number 3 is weird experimental games from major publishers. The video game industry used to be like the Wild West. Innovation was constantly happening, and game design was just something that kind of happened. People had ideas and they turned them into games, and sometimes it made sense and worked, sometimes it didn't. They still put it out, and yeah, it led to a lot of crap, but it seems like there's more crap nowadays than there was then, so what gives? We just talked about the lack of curation on the storefronts, did we not? But it seems like, in terms of the larger developers, in recent years, everything is super focus grouped, play tested, and carefully crafted. Yeah, a lot of the time that's probably for the best, because it does mean the games meet a certain standard, but it also feels like there's something a little bit lost. Like, let's look at some of the games that Sony put out for PlayStation back in 1996. Crash Bandicoot, 3D platformer, Aquanauts Holiday scuba diving game, Parappa the Rapper cartoon rhythm game, Twisted Metal 2 car combat game, and Epidemic and FPS. I know it was a different time, but that's a ton of variety from one publisher in 1 year. In total, Sony published or co-published 48 games in 1996. In 2022, they published 6 games. 2 of them were remasters, 1 was a baseball game, 1 was a racing game, and 2 of them were open world action games. Look at every major publisher like Activision or EA, similar trend. Yes, indies are giving us the nice weird ideas, but I kind of miss big developers doing it too. Like Crash Bandicoot actually is an extremely weird experimental game where Naughty Dog literally had to program for the PlayStation in a way that they weren't allowed to. That's a weird story if you want to look into it. But Parappa the Rapper, what is that? You never see that from a AAA now. And number 2 is the sincere, serious shooter. We were all sick to death in the mid-2000s of the brown and bloom. Every major game was desaturated, murky, and laughably self-serious. When games started to have color, that felt like a revelation. Nobody could ever possibly want to go back to the old days, right? And look, I get it. I was right there with everybody else complaining, and I think if that's all that everything was, I probably would complain again. But we have gone so far in the other direction. It's not just colorful, it's like garish. And the plots, they're like cartoons. It's like a Marvel movie where everything is self-aware. Everything is like making fun of the fact that it's a video game. I get it, BioShock really did a great piece of satire, but it wasn't necessarily to even be funny. It was toying with what you thought about a game at the time. And I am a millennial. I am completely a millennial, but I am tired of millennial sensibilities. Like, think about it. Gears 5, Halo Infinite, Far Cry 6. These games are super colorful, super jokey, less serious. Like, even Modern Warfare 2 has kind of a cartoony action movie vibe, especially if you compare it to the dark, relatively, at least by COD standards, grounded storytelling of the previous. Arcane is taking this direction. Like, Prey was super serious. Deathloop was kind of goofy, although I'm not complaining about Deathloop. Redfall almost seems like it's going to be kind of more of the same. I don't know, the game looks good anyways. But that doesn't mean I want devs just chasing the popularity of Fortnite or MCU or whatever. It just seems too far in that direction. And it's less that I don't want humor at all in games, and more like I don't think every game needs to be a comedy game. Some games can be serious, and within a serious game, there can be humor. Like every other entry on this list, there are some super big exceptions. Plague Tale Requiem, Elden Ring, fantastic games, super serious. But as far as shooters go, everything feels like it's bright and colorful and irreverent, and I know that Saints Row isn't primarily a shooter, but I think that's representative of what everything's supposed to be now, and nobody liked it. I'd just like to see some more grounded games, that's all. And finally, at number 1, Peripherals. Yeah, this actually kind of started out as a joke, but then we kind of started to talk about it and realized there might be something there. You might be wondering what I'm smoking, but hear me out. So the mid-2000s was just the time for game peripherals. The Wii came out, was flooding the market with cheap plastic crap you could strap on your Wiimote. There was the Guitar Hero, Rock Band stuff, undisputed kings of that. First Guitar Hero hit in 2005, Wii hit in 2006. Major sweet spot right there. These days, the best you're getting for peripherals are some alternate controllers, maybe a carrying case for the Switch, and sometimes Nintendo will put out some weird thing that works for a single game, but that's about it. And no, I don't think anybody's clamoring for a return to the days of the Wii or a Wii 2. Motion controls can stay mostly dead, but when something is mostly dead, that means it's partly alive. I think there's some room for some goofy alternate controllers. Remember the chainsaw controller? Yeah, Resident Evil 4 is coming out again, right? Give us a chainsaw controller, man. But the thing that I think people are actually nostalgic for is Rock Band. Those are amazing games, even if Activision managed to run Guitar Hero into the ground. Some kind of revival of that would probably do pretty well. I mean, look at the Clone Hero community. There's so many people out there that just want to play these games again that fans went and made a new one themselves, and it's actually a pretty popular and active game. But like, make the peripherals a little less junky. Instead of cheap plastic crap, make some quality plastic crap. I don't know how many people are going to be on board for that, but like, I want to play Rock Band again. I can't possibly be the only one.
And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on Game Ranks.